to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott, and joining me for this latest installment of the greatest TV drama episodes of all time, well, we're going to be talking about a Kentucky lawman this evening, so who better than a Kentucky lawyer? It's Brian. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Scott. How are you tonight?
I am doing fine. I keep walking out my door and looking outside and watching where we're getting piled on with snow today. So it's kind of a interesting experience because I'm like, oh, this is one year I ain't going to be shoveling any snow because, the foot.
Well, it seems like the seasons are at least trying to give us some hope for a white Christmas. So maybe things will look up for 2021.
White Christmas. It's so racist. Anyway. Oh, by the way, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just curious. Because my knowledge is largely shaped by TV series and movies more than anything else over the years. In your actual position, are you considered an officer of the court, or does that only apply to prosecutors?
No, I'm considered an officer of the court.
You are? Okay. So
yes.
I could have said you were a Kentucky officer of the law, too. Look at that. Anyway, as I've beyond hinted at in that intro and what I just said, the series we will be talking about this evening is, in fact, Justified. And it's the second season finale, Bloody Harlan, that comes in at number 13 on the greatest TV drama episodes of all time. But here's the part where everyone can run to the bathroom. Lickety-split quick disclaimer about the countdown. The countdown, which obviously amounts to a top 20 list, these are not my personal choices, nor was the list composed based on my personal biases. Well, as much as one can filter that out, at least. I read and culled together information and stats from numerous articles and websites over the past several years. I also incorporated data from ranking sites like Ranker.com and IMDb.com, etc., etc. I did whittle out TV series episodes that had already been given the full podcast coverage treatment by us in the past. That's why you're not going to see any episodes of Better Call Saul or Legion or anything from season 2 of Fargo. Those shows episodes would not be eligible for this list, as well as others. Episodes, not shows, because if we hadn't... Anyway, although I have neglected to mention this in the previous installments, because I assume it's kind of obvious, I will also reiterate that no series was permitted to have more than one entry in the countdown, because otherwise, let's be honest, the countdown would likely be dominated by a considerably smaller handful of TV shows, probably all of which we haven't even gotten to in the countdown yet. All right, that's out of the way. Let's saddle up, Brian, for Justified. First, a little background on the series. This is the fun part for me. Now, Justified ran on the FX network from 2010 to 2015. It racked up 6 seasons and 78 episodes. The series is based on a character that was created by the great Elmore Leonard. Big fan, and the biggest compliment I ever received myself with some early writing of mine, script writing I did, was they said I had a very Elmore Leonard-like feel to how I was writing. I don't think that was true. I couldn't compare to such a great writer, but it was the greatest compliment I could have received. The character we're talking about here is Deputy Marshal Raylan Givens, a man who got out of the holler in Harlan County, Kentucky, but as we see over the course of those 6 seasons, he never quite got the holler out of him. Now, a little bit of background on Givens. He had appeared in a couple novels back in the early 90s, Pronto and Riding the Rap, but it was a shorter story Leonard penned later on, Fire in the Hole, that really laid the groundwork for the TV series, and in particular the ever-present and ongoing dynamic and struggle between Raylan Givens and his not at all better half, Boyd Crowder. Now, this would normally be the part where I'd be telling you something about Graham Yost, a guy with some really solid writing and producing credits that range from the excellent Keanu Reeves summer flick Speed to his heavy involvement and really excellent series such as, From the Earth to the Moon, Band of Brothers, The Pacific, The Americans. He was the guy who developed the series for FX. Well, actually, I did just tell you that, so I don't know why I said that. But let me move on to something it's possible that some of you, maybe most of you, if not all of you, did know. Brian probably knows, but maybe you guys didn't. If I had told you that Justified was not not the first time Raylan Givens had been portrayed on screen. Would you be surprised? You can say if you'd be surprised or not, Brian. I don't know.
No, I would not be surprised.
Because you know. Well, as the rest of you might recall from a few minutes ago, I mentioned how Elmore Leonard had written 2 novels that featured Marshall Givens back in the 90s. Well, it turns out one of them, the one that was titled Pronto, was actually adapted into a TV movie back in 1997. And here's the extra little fun kick there. The star of that movie, Pronto, the dude playing Raylan Givens, was actor James LaGrosse. Is it LaGrosse? LaGrosse. You know, I looked up how to pronounce his name a week ago, and I already forgot. I should have written it down. You can like Google pronounce the name, and you get the little YouTube 15-second clip, and you have like that weird voice going, LaGrosse, LaGrosse, LaGrosse. And I have it in my mind. It's like, I don't think that's how it's pronounced. Anyway, I don't think it's a big O at the end there. Anyway, that actor, almost 15 years later, Mr. LaGrosse, I don't know, LaGrosse, he ended up playing a recurring character on Justified, Wade Messer, who actually appears for the first time in the series on the episode that we're going to be focusing on in this podcast. I think that's pretty cool.
It's very cool, and I had forgotten about Wade Messer until I watched that episode, and the show has a lot of great characters that have, shall we say, unusual names. Boyd, Wade, Dewey. It's really a strength of the show, the casting and the characters that they populate the world with.
Oh, absolutely. They give us it's in a way it's like it's almost like a Southern fried version of when you watch a show like The Wire, and you have the array of characters there. We'll also have quite a few interesting names, but
right.
Obviously a very different setting. But they add an air of authenticity to it with the actors in their portrayal. I think that applies to Justified as well, because there's never, even though especially over the course of 6 seasons, you do end up with maybe a few characters who are maybe just a little bit over the top. But everything seems very real and palpable in this in the Justified universe, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a cool place to visit, and I'm glad we're revisiting it for this podcast.
Oh yeah! Again, one of the nice things about doing this series of podcasts has been for me, and hopefully some if not all of my co-hosts, is you're revisiting shows that you haven't watched in some cases a few years, some cases several years. The X-Files for me, that might have been, was almost 2 decades since I last watched an X-Files episode that I can recall. Obviously with this show, it's been about, what would we say, 5 years? Because it was 2015 when it ended. So we are going to be talking about the season 2 finale, but it stands to reason we got to talk just a bit, in heavy air quotes, because we know how these things go on this podcast, about the second season overall. If I was initially going to say if for no other reason than to set the stage for Bloody Harlan, but there's also something else I want to say. I'm probably going to wait till later on in the podcast. It's just a general observation I've come to believe over doing these podcasts for the last couple months and anticipating future ones as well. But on to season 2. So to me, I remembered before I even started the rewatch, my memory had it that season 2 was my favorite season of the show. I mean, I do love the way the show ended. It is thankfully one of the drama series that ended very strong compared to some that didn't. But irregardless of that, season 2 is always my personal favorite. Brian, did you feel in a similar way, or did you have a different season that was more to your liking, or what?
Season 2 is probably my favorite. As I watch it, there are different things. I didn't watch the entire show again, but it's probably my favorite. And I think a large part of that is, character actor Supreme Margot Martindale playing Mags really was a strong performer, and her character and a lot of the interactions in season 2 really were something. And so it probably is, but I wouldn't say that definitively. But it's if it's not the strongest, it's right at the top.
Yeah, I would say she would be a major factor in why it's my favorite season as well. Certainly not the only one, but definitely she. If I was to pick one performer standout from the season, it's her. Probably why she won the Emmy for guest actor and guest female actor, I guess, in a dramatic series that year. And the actor playing one of her sons, Dickie, Jeremy Davies. He got the Emmy, but he got it, I think, for the following season. I think he got it for the following season because I guess his character appeared throughout season 3 as well. Wasn't he in prison throughout season 3, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, he runs into Boyd in prison because Boyd beats the crap out of Raylan and goes to prison, and they meet up, and Boyd gets released and Dickie stays in and gets beaten, and all kinds of stuff happens to Dickie in that season. But I'm sure as we talk about this season 2, we'll talk a lot about Dickie.
Well, you can't. If you're on this podcast, you can't help but talk about that. Anyway, oh wait, that's a different podcast. That's STVD After Dark. We actually get rid of the V for that. It was just STD. Which usually tend to happen after dark. Anyway, but season 2.
Well, and I would say definitely would happen if you hung out with Dickie Bennett. So
yeah, pretty much. I didn't know you wrap the rabbit skin around your private skin. You're going to catch something. Anyway, season 2, the arc deals primarily with. Well, we just mentioned Mags and Dickie. It's the Bennett family, or actually clan is probably a better way to put it, whatever. It's really kind of largely focuses around them in Harlan, their criminal dealings and all the things that happen throughout the course of the season. This season actually began where the first one left off. I made the semi-mistake of not watching the final episode of season 1. So usually when I want to watch the first episode of a season, I like to watch the last episode of the previous season just so I know where I am. But I was just relying on the previously on Justified. So, so it was like for a hot minute there, I was like going, wait a minute, what was going on back then? And I was like, oh yeah, okay, now I got it. When the people from Miami were coming to kill Raylan, and they end up killing Boyd's father. Is it Bo or Bowman, or I get Bowman's the brother. What the father was the father's name? Bo?
No, I think the father is Arlo.
No, that's Raylan's father.
Oh, I thought that's what you were talking about.
No,
I'm sorry.
But we can see because it's just after Boyd's father had been killed. And that was the
I don't. That Bo was his dad or his brother. I don't remember.
Well, his brother's name is Bowman, so maybe his father's name is just Bo. Wow, we're such a bad podcaster. I'm gonna look it up right now just so I don't want to let a mistake like that go too long. So I'm just gonna go to Bulletville. Let's see. Bo. Wow, we're right all along. Yeah, MC Gainey, the actor most of us know as, he was like, the main other of the others on Lost. That guy.
Yeah, Mr. Happy.
Yeah. Or as I like to call him, the poor man's Clancy Brown. Anyway.
That's really, that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. So, so basically this season picked up where that one left off. But really, like I said, there's really more about the Bennetts, and because you've got, Mags and Dickie, and of course we also have Coover. Oh, speaking of Lost, got a couple Lost connections. Jeremy Davies was, of course, people know from Lost, among other things. But, Brad William Henke plays Coover. He also appeared on Lost, if I'm not mistaken. Right? Isn't he briefly on Lost, I think, if I'm not mistaken?
He looked familiar. He probably is, but I can't say for sure.
I think he was like one of those disciples that show up later on, but I think
At the temple?
Yeah, I'm looking him up really fast, but I don't think he's long for the world on the show. I think he ends up getting killed off fairly early. Let me see, Justified. Lost. He played Bram on Lost. He was in 6 episodes. And his final episode was in LAX Part 1. He's in both parts of the incident, Parts 1 and 2.
See, now you've doubted yourself twice, and your mind's like a steel trap, not letting anything escape.
I'm you know what? It's because I'm so attuned to the fact that after a recording, I've made I discover or I find out from someone else that I made a mistake or made a couple mistakes or something, you know. Some of them are just silly. Like I mentioned on the last podcast. Oh, last time I think Jamie was on the podcast was The Boys. I totally forgot that she did the Dexter one with me, which was like, hello, the countdown. Or the fact that I referred to Peter Boyle's character on Everybody Loves Raymond as Frank Romano, which is a weird mistake to make because obviously it should be Frank Barone, but it's based on Ray Romano's life, so really, his name really would be Frank Romano. Anyway, back to Justified. So you got Coover there, and you also got the dude who's the police chief Doyle, who since we mentioned the actor, the other actors, that actor is Joseph Lyle Taylor. So I like that they established, right from the get-go that, it's not just that this is just, a criminal enterprise. They've gone so far as having one of their own be like the guy in charge of the police department there in Harlan. So you pretty much don't get much more corrupt than that.
Yeah, they do on the show. They do an interesting take that most of the local people they present as corrupt, but they show the state police as sort of the moral, upright people in regards to law enforcement. But he plays a big role, and I forgot how big a role he played in it until I watched season 2 for this podcast.
Yeah, I did as well. I always remember the other the first few actors we mentioned. I kind of had forgotten about him, and I realized, and he's kind of key because even when we eventually find out what Mags's plan is overall when she makes the deal with the mining company, it's so that everything's going to be left to him or really his family because she wants his kids to be able to get out of Harlan to be able to escape all this. And when she initially kind of shuts out Dickie, because I think at that point Coover's already kind of bitten the dust at that point. So I guess again, we find out about this family. We find out about the history between the Bennetts and the Givens family, especially between Raylan and Dickie. I love the story about how Raylan essentially crippled Dickie during a baseball game brawl when they were kids in high school. Pretty much taking a bat to his leg, if I'm not mistaken. So.
Yeah, which comes back later in play on the show when Dickie beats Raylan with a ball bat when he's tied upside down later.
Oh yeah, he's got a Raylan pinata there.
Yeah, and it's funny that story when I heard it. I vaguely remembered it, but it reminded me that there was a kid when I played baseball that I slid into second base to break up a double play. And I pretty much shattered his leg, and they had to take him off the field in an ambulance. And years later, someone I knew ran into him, and he said, "Do you know so-and-so?" And they both said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, well, Brian, he broke my leg when we played baseball years ago." And so when I watched this, I thought, somewhere out there, is there a dark desire for him to find me and hang me upside down and beat me with a ball bat? So they hit a little close to home.
Hey, I know how it is. If I just finished watching the latest season of Big Mouth. And there are way too many things that happened that season that hit way too close to home for me, but I can't talk about any of them on this podcast or any podcast. So anyway. And not just the one that friends of mine texted me or messaged me about waiting for me to watch. It's like, oh, they don't know about the other one. Anyway, back to Justified.
Well, let me say, when you're 15 years old and an ambulance has to actually come onto the field to take the kid away that you hurt, even if it was a clean play, it's something you never forget. So.
Oh, you were probably bragging about it for weeks, Brian.
No, and if the offended party's listening, I'm still sorry.
He's lying. And from that day on, Brian swore he would fight for justice. It's your superhero origin story.
That's my origin story. Yeah.
Oh man. So. Anyway, and I apologize if I'm fumbling through the season a little bit here, so let me try to do this a little bit tighter. We're following the Bennetts, and at a certain point during the course of the season, there's this whole storyline with a mining company that's come into town that wants to buy up all the parcels of land, and basically cut off the top of the mountain, and Mags appears to be, leading the charge against them, but it turns out it's all kind of bullshit. And she's the one who actually makes the deal with them, and which ends up screwing over any number of people in town, whatever. But it is to secure a future for Doyle's family, for them to get out of Harlan. So you have all this stuff going on. You've got at the same time, you've got the Boyd Crowder situation, where Boyd initially, as the season starts, Boyd's a little depressed. And it appears initially that he's renounced his life of crime. He's just going to go back to, coal mining, in fact. But, in Godfather 3 like fashion, just when he thought he was out, he gets pulled right back in. And, by season's end, Boyd is right back to what he was doing all along. Just as bad as he ever has been. Boyd Crowder is as a standout a character on the entire whole of Justified as any. I mean, in some ways he might be the most interesting character of all 6 seasons, even more so than Raylan, I would say.
And going back to what's happening through the season, this show really did its work on the issues of Eastern Kentucky, mountaintop removal. In a later season, they talk about the OxyContin problem, which was huge here. So that they really hit on a lot of the issues facing the area. So it wasn't just transporting stories from other places. They gave a lot of the issues a real Kentucky feel, which was nice. And Boyd Crowder, the great thing about all villains is when sometimes you root for them and sometimes you root for Boyd in this show. And it's really amazing that we see some of these criminals, with Confederate flags and Nazi symbols, and yet they still somehow humanize them to a little bit of a degree to understand where they're coming from. And Boyd Crowder, I mean, you wanted Raylan and him to meet up and settle old scores, but a part of you didn't want either one of them to lose either, because they were both such great characters. So kudos to our man. Why am I forgetting his name?
Walton Goggins.
Yes, Walton Goggins, for a great portrayal as Boyd Crowder.
Walton Goggins, the man I sometimes refer to as the FX Network MVP, because of his major second lead status on both Justified and The Shield, which unfortunately is not going to appear in this countdown, but probably should have, now that I think about it.
And also his tremendous over the top portrayal in Sons of Anarchy of the. That's
right.
He was so. I mean, he almost. It's almost like in his contract he had to be in all the big FX shows. So he probably made FX a lot of money.
Oh my god! I remember getting so excited when he showed up on Sons of Anarchy. He showed up a couple times, if I'm not mistaken, but he's excellent. Yeah, and going along with what you're saying, I mean, I noticed even when you get to the final episode of the series that they do credit where they got their stories from the people, not just from the state police, et cetera, and the departments, whatever, but from the people of Harlan County. So they although this is obviously this is all a fictional tale, a lot of the things we see, incidents, little things here and there, are absolutely inspired by things that happened in that area. So that, once again, it has that very real feel. If I didn't know any better, I would have thought the damn thing was shot in Kentucky, and then I got, nope, it's actually shot in California. I was like, oh, I thought this was shot in Kentucky. Oh.
Sometimes they pull out and the mountains aren't quite Kentucky mountains, and it's a little dirtier and not as green as Kentucky, but by and large, I mean, they don't shoot in areas that look like LA. I mean, they do go out of their way to shoot in some interesting places. And I'm sure it was very challenging, but overall, yeah, I don't have too much complaint about that.
Hey man, when they used to shoot the Star Trek the original series, they were shooting it all over L.A. Whatever.
Right.
when Kirk is fighting the Gorn, that's somewhere in L.A., man.
Wait, that wasn't in space? Is that what you're telling me?
It wasn't in space. I'm sorry. I know. But there is a Santa Claus, so don't worry. Anyway.
Well, and to go just to touch on your point, I mean, there's a wonderful documentary, if you've never seen it, about coal miners set in that area called Harlan County, USA. And it may have been nominated for an Academy Award, but it was about coal miners fighting for the right to organize years ago. So there was some intention, I think, in picking Harlan and showing the issues and doing as good as they can for the kind of show it was. So I think overall a great show and great job by the production crew.
Huh. See, I didn't know anything. I just thought it was a place where Harlan Ellison lived, so I had no idea what it was. Anyway. Stupid joke. Bad joke. Anyway, back to season 2. Anyway, at that point where Mags has kind of made that deal with the mining company, was it like Blackfire or something like that? She kind of just tells Dickie, you got the weed business, because the Bennetts were known for being in the weed business from the get-go, which is a major thing throughout the season as well. But she kind of just leaves Dickie the weed business, and that's it. She pretty much cuts him out of the family of the life, at least initially there. And he kind of wants to start his own criminal empire. And then it gets this whole situation, the Dickie versus Boyd kind of battle that ends up forming through the course of a couple episodes. And Boyd even, he starts recruiting his own army. He gets Arlo involved as well, which leads to a series of unfortunate events. And Dickie's usually at the center of a lot of the unfortunate events that happen in this season, I noticed. Specifically when Dickie realizes that Arlo is one of the people involved in robbing of their stash of both marijuana and money, and he goes to Arlo Given's house, and he ends up killing Arlo's wife and Raylan's aunt, who really was pretty much a mother figure for him growing up, Helen. I had forgotten about that when I was watching, and until the scene came on, I went, oh yeah, I can't believe Raylan didn't end up killing Dickie as a result of that, because that was just, oof, you killed an old lady, man? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, and Dickie Bennett is the ultimate weasel villain that has no honor towards his own men, his own family, nobody. And Jeremy Davies did a wonderful job making you really detest him for some of the actions and the things he did. And the relationship, watching Dickie and Mags together, was great to see those two actors and see the power that she exerted over him, which ultimately, I think when he saw he had no chance, he went for it. And as you said, set off a terrible chain of events. Yeah.
So you have that going on, which obviously is only going to escalate the situation. And as if Raylan wasn't going to be involved in what's going on down in Harlan anyway, he's not going to be able to step away from it at this point. You also have one of the major storylines throughout the season, right up to the final episode, is we are introduced to this young girl on the series, Loretta McCready, who's played by Caitlin Dever. I guess people know her on another series, which I think is a streaming show that is pretty popular. Is it Unbelievable? Is that the show that she's on? Is that what it's called?
I couldn't tell you. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. I've heard good things about it. I probably should have looked it up. So, but the whole situation with her is that one of the guys working for the Bennetts kind of is bugging her, harassing her, and it turns out he had been a sex offender, and her dad thought he was calling like an anonymous tip line to kind of tip the police off to the guy. Unfortunately, just making that call when he's basically looking out for his daughter escalates things for him with the Bennett family, because there's always been issues with the fact that he was growing his own pot when, pot is really the Bennetts, they're in control of that there. But Mags ends up having him killed. Well, she kills him himself by, poisoning his apple pie. And by apple pie, we mean his beverage, not an actual piece of apple pie.
Actually, a very popular flavor of moonshine in Kentucky, apple pie.
I believe it. I'm just looking that up to make sure I had the show right for her. Dopes, Monsterland. I don't know. Unbelievable. I was right. Yay.
See? 3 for 3.
Oh my God, it's 3 times.
That's it. Stop. You can't get any better.
Well, she was in Booksmart too. How about that? Didn't see that. All right. So that's actually a major story because Mags tries to become kind of a surrogate mother for the Loretta character while keeping her from the information that, well, Mags killed her dad. And that's rather huge. I don't know what their long plan was there, because they initially are telling Loretta that, oh, we sent your dad down to do some business for us in Texas. Oh, he's going to be there for a while. At some point you're going to have to come up with another story or something. Unfortunately, by the time we get to the final episode of the season, Loretta actually does find out the truth, which leads to one of the more powerful scenes in the entire, not just season, probably the entire series.
Yeah, absolutely. And the young lady, Caitlin Dever, I think you said her name was, there's a history of children performers that don't step up to the plate, and she really was great in this role, and the interactions with her and Mags were great. And I think that's the central hub of this season, other than Raylan being Raylan, is Mags and all the people moving in and out of her orbit, and leads to that wonderful confrontation in the final episode.
Absolutely. The only other things I would want to note about the season before we get to the season finale that are probably worthy of mention, just to entice folks to check out season 2. There's a really fun, interesting storyline, especially how it takes, most of it is scrunched into one really crazy episode that in some weird way could actually be considered one of the best episodes of the series, or at least one of the most fun ones. The whole situation with Raylan and the fact he's kind of sort of getting back together with his ex-wife Winona. And there is that episode where she has gone down to the evidence room because the judge wants her to keep her notes there, which is kind of a strange thing to do in the first place, but okay, whatever. But when she goes to use one of the old lockers in the evidence room, there's an old box of money there. And then you get this whole thing where initially you think she's just taken $100 bill. And then for some reason she's at the bank, and then an armed robbery takes place, and she has it tightly in her fist, and the guy ends up, kind of smacking her around, to get it out of her hand. And it just goes on and on because of the serial number. And now, the feds are going to be notified, whatever. And then it gets worse because then she actually confesses to Raylan that, she didn't just take the one bill. She took the money altogether, which is like, oh, taking just the $100 bill, he could kind of like, okay, that was kind of a weird, wacky, little quirky thing you did. you stole all the money? Yeah, that's bad. You know?
Yeah, and it's one of the few. Raylan bends the law a few times, but what she did was one of the bigger transgressions Raylan let pass, and I think in many ways that's the seed of them getting back together and then having more difficulties later in the show.
Right.
But in that moment, it's kind of a weird situation, and based on what we've seen, is one of the few actions of her that seemed really impulsive and out of character, because she's always put together and
right.
Serious. So yeah, it was an interesting storyline.
Well, it's interesting because it kind of shows that, even the best of us can be we can fall to temptation, and in a situation like that where you realize I could just walk out of here with this and no one would be the wiser. No one would even know. I mean, if she doesn't have that $100 bill there, she probably gets away with it,
Right. It's like the philosopher's question of what is character? It's what you do when people aren't looking, because when no one's watching you, we're often tempted to do things we wouldn't otherwise do.
So now I know that I have no character whatsoever.
No.
Dude, you really don't know. So also during the course of the season, when speaking of Winona, her husband, soon to be divorced husband, puts out a hit on Raylan, which brings our another favorite crazy character back onto the show, Wynn Duffy, albeit briefly, but he does show up here. But perhaps more important character-wise, we can also see how Art is, he's trusting Raylan less and less as we go through the course of the season. It's almost, I don't want to go as far as say a rift is forming between Raylan and his superior Art, but kind of sort of there is, just to a certain extent at least.
Well, Art almost is siding with Winona because Raylan is so focused on Harlan that causes a rift with him and Winona, and he's getting involved in stuff that Art doesn't want him getting involved in. And Art and Winona have an interesting dynamic that they sort of get closer, and she goes to him and he'll go to her and talk about Raylan. I like that. I like that pairing too.
Right. And Art's also one of my favorite characters on the show. I love that actor. I love his interactions with Raylan. It's probably the fun, the nice, quiet, funny moments I really look forward to.
Oh, he has great moments. I think that I was watching an episode. I don't even remember which one because I've binged so many. But Raylan says something about something bad that happened when he went to Harlan, and Art's only line is, "Huh? Imagine that." Like just. Smart ass. Art's so great.
Yeah, Art's a far bigger smart ass than Raylan, I would say, on the show.
Yeah.
but a very dry sense of humor. And we're pretty much poised to talk about Bloody Harlan now, but there is one other thing I wanted to mention about the season that I had not remembered, because why would I remember this from when I first saw it? Because I didn't know who he was, and most people didn't. I love when you're watching a show that was on either be 5 years ago or 50 years ago, whatever the show is. And it's one thing when they feature an actor or performer or whatever that everybody knew at the time. That's kind of cool, but it's like, look at who the special guest star was. It's far more fun when it's someone who is a relative nobody at the time. No one knows that person. He or she is not famous, but they became famous later. And I spotted someone in one of the episodes of Justified that I had no recollection was ever on a show like Justified. Chadwick Boseman's in an episode. I don't know if you saw that one when you were doing your rewatch or not, but yeah.
I did, and I did a double take and wondered if that was him and watched the credits to make sure it was.
Yep. Chadwick Boseman appears in the episode For Blood or Money. He plays a drug dealer. I think they say the drug dealer. Ralph Flex Beeman, or just Flex, whatever. But yep, that's definitely Chadwick Boseman. And, since we sadly lost him this year, that kind of made it especially like, oh, look at that. Oh, not playing such a great guy in this,
Yeah, immensely talented.
Oh, hugely. I mean, my favorite, if I may, well, we got plenty of time. If I may give a minute to Chadwick for a second here. My favorite little bit of trivia that I know about Chadwick Boseman, because I watched the show at the time. And this might have been mentioned on the podcast a million years ago. I don't remember. Don't know why. I don't remember if we talked about Black Panther at all on the podcast. We might have briefly. But everyone, I'm assuming most, if not all, our listeners have seen the film Black Panther, probably several times. So we all know Chadwick Boseman was, T'Challa, Black Panther, and we all know that Michael B. Jordan was basically the antagonist, his enemy, even though it was such a great villain because you could certainly see his point of view on it, blah, blah, blah. A little interesting piece of trivia. So I used to watch this show back in the 90s, late 80s and through the 90s. I have mentioned this on the podcast before. I used to watch the daytime soap opera All My Children. Watched it with my then girlfriend at the time, who after that we've been friends ever since. She stopped watching at some point. I kept watching. At a certain point in the series, I think in the not the late 90s, maybe very early 2000s, 2001, 2, 3, around that time. Can't remember the exact year. So they bring on a character. One of the characters on the show, major characters on the show, a lawyer like you. Lawyer's name is Jackson Montgomery, because that's such a great, soap opera name, whatever. And he ends up with an adopted son. As you might guess, Jackson Montgomery is Caucasian. His adopted son is African American. The first actor to play his son, and we're talking about a teenager, is Chadwick Boseman. Character's name is Reggie. They recast Reggie within, I don't know, weeks or months. Less than a year's time, I'm pretty sure. They recast him with Michael B. Jordan.
Wow.
So they both played the same character on the same daytime soap opera, 16, 17, 18 years before Black Panther. The other interesting thing with Michael B. Jordan, just because a lot of people will say that the first thing they saw him on was The Wire, season 1, which is probably very true, because he got his gig on All My Children after The Wire. You'd think it'd be the other way around. No, he went to work on All My Children after The Wire, not before. So for all the people out there who want to make fun of daytime soaps, probably shouldn't. Anyway.
The episode where Scott defends daytime soaps using Chadwick Boseman and Michael B. Jordan. I like it.
There you go. Hey, man. Superman, Christopher Reeve came from a... Anyway, so we are here to talk about Bloody Harlan, finally. Couple credits before we get into the episode, and I let Brian speak for the rest of the podcast. The episode was directed by Michael Dinner. A director who's definitely got some skin in the game, other than the number of Justified episodes the dude directed. He also has a number of pilots under his belt. I'm saying it like that because I was talking about David Nutter in the previous podcast, because he's like the king of pilot directing. Michael Dinner's no slouch himself. Probably the biggest stand-up for him, because I'm not going to give you a list of his credits. The pilot for Sons of Anarchy. He also won an Emmy for directing an episode of Wonder Years, so maybe he's more diverse than David Nutter. I don't know. As for the writing of the episode, the main writer, because they had a whole bunch of people, but the real main writer was a guy named Fred Golan, who actually logged about 11 Justified episodes under his belt. He must like writing for Margot Martindale, because he also scripted a few episodes of the very underrated Sneaky Pete TV series that she starred on. By the way, my favorite little credit on his very first writing gig was doing a couple episodes of the USA Network Swamp Thing TV show back in the early 90s. So from the swamps to Kentucky. Anyway, so we can start talking about the actual episode now. The one thing I'll say to start off, and it was interesting, because obviously if I did a rewatch of the season, I watched the entire season leading up to the episode. So I watched 12 episodes leading to this 13th episode of the season. It's 13, right? I had a thought, not just about this episode, but just in general. They're probably one of the reasons why I think sometimes maybe not so much series finales, but definitely season finales might start to rise more to the top as far as when people start picking their favorite episodes of different TV shows, and why some of them might be the more critically acclaimed ones, why some of them are going to be on this, have been and will continue to be on this countdown, is that they're also benefiting from not only telling a great story within the confines of that episode, it's also the culmination of everything that's come before it. So this finale and this episode is fantastic, but it doesn't get to be fantastic without being built on the foundation of the previous 12 that led up to it. So I think I just think that's an interesting thing to know. It almost gives the season finales kind of a leg up on just your quote unquote random episodes. So I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but
no, you are. And I think that the corollary of that is that if somebody's told a compelling story and then the season finale sucks, then that's probably why some of those episodes are rated as the worst episodes of all time, because you're so disappointed that this story you've invested in and appreciated didn't pay off, that it was terrible. And so I mean, that makes perfect sense, that you've built up this beautiful thing and you either cap it off with a great episode or you reduce it to rubble with a piece of crap episode. And so that makes sense.
Yeah, just, if you want to be crass, just think of like the entire season being, you go from foreplay to the actual act, but if you don't finish, you're not really going to. Anyway, wow. Why? I don't have an excuse.
I would somehow work in a Sting tantric joke here, but I think that.
Well, the Sting. That's when you talk about series for now.
right. It took this long to pay off.
Oh man, no excuses, Candy Honey. All right, so let's talk about this finale. So, is there anything you want to dive in on first here before, so people can get a break from hearing me ramble here?
I mean, no, I just think it picks up the pace, and everybody is headed towards Mag's house. We get Loretta leaving the foster home, and I like the touch of Raylan getting the foster dad to sort of sensing something's off with him. I really like that scene, that he gets him to more or less confess, like, hey, I used to be a bad guy and I don't want anybody to hurt my family, so I had a gun and now the gun's missing. And
right.
I thought that was a nice bit of writing to how she gets the gun. And they could have just had her take it, but they added that little touch of this guy, and that's how Raylan finds out. I thought that was a nice little touch in the episode.
Yeah, it's almost indicative of one of the things I really like about Justified, whereas in lesser hands, lesser writers, lesser, directors, etc., this show might play out as a more straightforward, cop actiony, whatever kind of show. They will always take the time for these little moments, little character moments, because what's great about that little moment you just talked about, it's showing the keen perception of Raylan, and not just specific of how we've seen it before. It's being used in a situation that we hadn't anticipated when that scene starts. Because we just thought this is your typical, they're a very nice foster family, and she's kind of like the outsider with them, and she probably doesn't quite fit. They avoid the cliche of that. And they really drill down for that little bit. It's like, oh, that's very interesting. It's very interesting.
That they do, and they don't make the foster family look like bad people. They don't make it look like Loretta went from a bad situation to another bad situation. Looks like a nice home with caring people, but when she leaves, they give you that one little detail to tell you why she has the gun, and I really liked that and thought that was good writing. And Loretta's journey, when watching it again, and seeing that final scene, that's one of the most dramatic moments of maybe the whole show. But in this episode, you think all this other stuff has happened, and it still may go wrong. And so I just thought it was wonderful. And that was sort of the thing that when I watched it again, all the other major beats I remembered, but it's those little moments that I've probably forgotten, that as I've rewatched these episodes, that make this show, that set it apart from so many other shows.
Right. And I think I'm right in sync with you on that one. I had forgotten, not just how important a character Loretta was for this season, and this is a character that we will continue to see for the rest of the show, by the way, folks out there, but how intense those final moments with her are. And even though I knew what was going to happen, you still have that tension there, because when you saw it for the first time, that could have gone the other way. It really, it absolutely could have. It's very powerful, very excellent. Again, as you said, always major props when you actually see, essentially a child actor or actress really bring it home, and especially when they're acting up against Margot Martindale, who's almost like she's almost like the grande dame of American TV, quite frankly.
Yeah, she's probably one of those people that eventually, when her in memoriam happens, and I hope that doesn't come anytime soon, but when people see her credits, they'll go, holy crap, she was in all that stuff, just living one of those charmed lives where almost everything she's in is good, and she's good in it.
I would highly recommend folks, if you haven't seen it before, at some point in your life, watch the animated series on Netflix, BoJack Horseman. Margot Martindale is a recurring character as herself, and they often will go over her credits on the show. It's the great Margot Martindale, star of The Americans and Justified. It's very funny. She's hysterical on it.
Yeah, she's great. And in watching this, I think something that stood out to me was, for some reason, I didn't think her arc ended this early in the show. I didn't know it was over after season 2. Oh. I hadn't remembered that. As I started watching the season, I guess I thought it went on into season 3. But the fallout of it plays a big part in season 3. But right. I'd forgot that's where her story ended until everybody ended up at the house, and then I remembered what had happened then. Right.
Well, they did that thing where they bookended the season with the scenes of her poisoning her father, and then her being poisoned herself, and the scenes mirror each other. She even repeats the same lines in the scene, except now she's talking about herself. And there is that moment in that scene when she plays it, and when she's talking to Raylan, he thinks for a moment, wait, did you just poison me? And it's like, no, she's talking about herself.
Right.
But the look on his face for that moment when he thinks he might have been poisoned is nice, because he doesn't overplay it either. He's just, Timothy Olyphant is really great on the show, by the way. He's just,
we've talked about our love for him as in almost anything, and of all the characters, he got the most time in the shoes of Raylan Givens, so maybe that's why we love him the most. But watching him do the work on this show, I forgot how much I loved it, and I fell back in love with it watching it again.
Oh, absolutely! If it wasn't for the fact I have so many other things to watch, I totally would have continued to watch, seasons 3, 4, 5, whatever. But, I had to stop. I had other things to do. I did watch a few other ones. I didn't watch as many as you did, but we'll talk about that a little bit after. And I had mentioned, Dickie, and how he seems to be at the center of all the unfortunate shootings and deaths in this season. We already saw that he killed Helen, and of course, then he shoots Ava in this episode. And I keep thinking, it's like, is Dickie just going to shoot like every woman on this show? Is that is he going to kill his mom too? At that point.
Or maybe just at some point he'd kick a dog. I mean, they just have him do the worst things, and he's just despicable.
It's interesting because I've seen him in so many things, and he doesn't often play the hateful character. I mean, obviously people know his character. If you're a fan of Lost, you know his character from that show. You're not supposed to hate him. You kind of, he's a bit of a schmuck, but you like him, whatever. I just saw him when I was doing my rewatch of Hannibal. And he's in a couple episodes of that, and he's a very dim, damaged character who, your heart almost breaks for because he's just such a sad guy or whatever. But then you see him on this, it's like, no, it's okay to hate him. It's, in fact, the only thing that made you hate him less is because his brothers, Coover specifically, is worse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's the runt trying to prove himself at every point. And by trying to prove himself, he goes overboard and takes things too far. And, I think they make him so despicable. There's even that scene where after they shoot Ava, he runs off and leaves his guy. He won't even wait for the guy with him to get in the car and lets him just get shot and left in the road.
Right. But he looks like he's having so much fun with Mags when she's singing on the porch in that episode, and he's kind of dancing around. It's like, oh, look, Dickie Bennett. Anyway, so what had happened? Oh yeah, the thing that you had mentioned before, and let me tie it to the little ipso facto that I mentioned before we started talking about the season altogether. When Raylan gets caught by Dickie and he ends up being, tied up and being used as a piñata or whatever, the guy who distracts him is that Wade Messer character, the James LeGros character, who apparently initially had given Loretta a ride, at least up to a point. Then she kind of got out and made her way the rest of the way into Harlan herself, from what I understand. But yeah, Wade Messer actually kind of distracts Raylan so he gets bonked on the head by Dickie. So sure, he tells us like, oh, Wade Messer, you're not a good guy either. But we're going to see you a bunch of times until someone named Dewey. Doesn't Dewey Crow end up killing him later on? I think it's.
I think so.
I think it's Dewey Crow.
I think Dewey kills Wade, but it's funny that at the conclusion of the season, that's when Boyd ends up in prison and Dickie's there and Dewey's there too. And so you see Boyd, Dewey, and Dickie all in prison in season 3.
Oh, it's really funny now because I hadn't watched Justified in several years, and seeing Dewey Crow again, and then remembering, oh, this actor is the guy who we saw play Charles Manson in Mindhunter and stuff. Just showing his range. Because Dewey's no Charlie Manson. Let's put it that way.
No.
I'll tell you another thing I kind of forgot about, just from sidetracking myself, but it's about the show, so it's not really. It shows you how bad my memory has gotten. I haven't watched the show in about 5 years or so. So I chose to start off with the pilot, the very first episode. And I actually remembered how the pilot started. I remember the whole little showdown in Miami at this outside restaurant or cafe or whatever the heck it was, or rooftop thing. I remember that whole thing. You know what's weird that I forgot? And it's such a big thing throughout the whole show, and you even alluded to it or mentioned it earlier in the podcast. One times when we see Boyd and he's shirtless, and I had forgotten the giant swastika tattoo and stuff. I forgot.
Oh yeah.
I totally blanked on all the racism stuff with him, which is brought up constantly, and it's one of those things where you realize he's saying these things, but I don't think he believes them.
Right. Or even there's even later in the show when Boyd's in prison and intentionally gets himself beat up to go to the infirmary to try to get a shot at Dickie. He takes his shirt off to lift weights in the yard. and when he does, like his swastika is prominent, so of course they beat the crap out of him then. So, there's an interesting dynamic as Boyd works with Limehouse later in the show too. The black family that he tries to work with, and
right.
So I mean, race is a big part of it that's brought in and dealt with in an interesting way in the show, and you see, I think it's Devil has a huge Confederate flag on his arm, the tattoo.
Right. I also, it's funny because I watched the very beginning of the series, the second season, and then a few towards the end of the series. And I noticed, I don't know if it's mentioned throughout the series, or it just happened to be in the episodes that I watched. Speaking of Boyd and his feelings on race, and also if not just race, but also the anti-Semitism and the gag about the fact that he's never actually even met a Jew. I just thought that was kind of funny. Because,
yeah, but I mean, that's that. I mean, there are pockets of places in Appalachia where people are very isolated, and unless you get out and leave, your world is very small.
Oh, I totally get that. I'm just finding it amusing that it keeps being brought up that he has to admit that he's never actually met one, but he has all these supposed biases against him, even though, again, I never really buy that he actually feels this way. I feel it seems to be as more for show than anything else. It's
posturing and
posturing,
exactly. and he's a great. The thing you learn about Boyd through the show is whatever happens, he's a great adapter to his surroundings, and then a great salesman, and he can do those two things.
Right, and also Raylan also has to be a bit of a salesman as well, because that whole scene with Dickie and Boyd essentially saves him, and it's Boyd who saves him. But then he ends up making a deal with Boyd because Boyd wants to kill Dickie for shooting Ava. But Boyd needs Dickie, to help find Loretta still. And I guess there's this implication, at least in Boyd's mind, that he's going to give him back to him. It's like, I remember thinking at the time, no, he's not. He's not going to do that at all. Why would you think he'd do that? But Boyd certainly thinks so.
Well, probably one of my favorite lines, and it's not that cool if maybe anybody other than Raylan gives it, and gives the sort of look afterwards when Boyd says, "Are you asking or telling me?" And he says, "If it helps, you could tell people I asked." Oh, which is just sort of a half smart ass, half menacing, and that's what's so good about Raylan's character is he can say things very sort of funny but have an edge to him, and that's what you love about his character.
Oh, and there's few characters better at the subtlety of his threats are always really nice. Like I'm remembering a previous episode. It might have been to Win Duffy actually. He says, next time I'm here, there won't be a conversation. Little lines like that are kind of just enjoyable. He's just so much fun. And then the whole episode, obviously, it culminates in the showdown at the Bennett house. You get the shootout outside. You get Doyle gets his brains blown out by the U.S. Marshal to show up just in the nick of time, just when it looks like Raylan's about to be killed. But we have what's going on inside the house, and that's the scene that we've been talking about. The scene when Loretta goes in to see Mags, and it becomes a confrontation between them, and Loretta's holding the gun on her, and then Raylan goes in there to try to convince her not to throw away her life this way. And it could have played so standard, and it's just so well done. It's so powerful. The emotion between the two female performers, between Deaver and Martindale, It's so nicely orchestrated. You see, it's a great emotional payoff to a really great season, I think.
Yeah, totally. And I think something Justified did that's not usual in this sort of cop Western type world was there were a lot of strong female characters in Justified. And Mags, Winona, Ava. You look at how the journey of those characters and how strong they are. It's no surprise that in this season, the ultimate showdown is between this young girl and Mags, and that's probably the most tension in the whole show right there. And so I thought watching this show and seeing the evolution of Ava and the way Winona interacts with Raylan. This show really did a great job for the female characters on it and gave them a lot to work with.
It's interesting thinking about that. 'Cause I'm looking at the just skimming through my brain now about the FX network in general, which over the last 20 odd years has brought us a lot of really exceptional television series. They absolutely should be in the conversation of one of the best TV networks based on their output over the last 20 years. But the point I want, what you said, what came to my mind was, it's interesting because early on, the earlier series that were on FX, maybe not the greatest in terms of, I wouldn't even say, well, both female representation and how females were portrayed up to a point. I mean, there are maybe the Shield. There's a couple, decent female characters on that. Maybe not enough, but maybe. But Nip Tuck was a little kind of, the one major female character was kind of irritating from day one. The show, oh my God, Rescue Me, which I was a fan of for the first few seasons, and the show kind of went south on it. There is not one positive representation of a woman on that show, pretty much. All the women tend to be annoying or shrill or antagonistic, whatever. It's just, it's not a great show for it. There's like one character who's on it for like one season who maybe you can say otherwise about. But it's interesting how they kind of turned the corner, and then you started having shows where they started doing much better with it. Justified, surprisingly, is one of them because you wouldn't think that going in. Because Justified, when you hear what Justified is about, it's about Deputy Marshal and, in Kentucky and Harlan. You don't think there's going to be a great outlay of female representation and characters and strong characters. And yet, as you just outlined, there was. You get shows like The Americans, also very strong female characters that play a major part throughout that series, and so on. I just like the fact that they kind of reversed themselves and they've just gotten so much better in that category over the last 10 years as opposed to the first 10 years of their major dramatic programming.
Yeah, absolutely. I watched one of the episodes today that was striking, and it's one of the episodes during, I believe, season 3 where Ava discovers they're looking for a witness to who killed people at one of their portable oxy clinics. Mm-hmm. And it's the girl in the back trailer that the man has beaten up. And she goes in and Raylan shows up as she's going in, but they go into that trailer. She was going whether Raylan was there or not. And she really becomes a force to be reckoned with, Ava does. And I sort of like... I like that they didn't totally rehab her, that it was okay for us to still like her and she didn't have to be particularly good, on the side of good or virtue, that she could just be a character like all the other men and we still like her.
Right, absolutely. Ava is definitely a character who I definitely saw a certain evolution from season 1 through to the end of the series. So it was kind of nice to see that. Because you might not necessarily say that about other characters per se, but, or whatever changes or evolutions they made were more subtle. hers were a bit more dramatic from where she started to where she ended. But it's an excellent arc when you look over the course of 6 seasons. Probably should look up what do you know what the actress's name is? I kind of forgot what her name is.
I saw it on the credits and recognized it, but I don't recall it off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's funny how many times I sat through those damn credits. You think I know who's who?
Exactly, and I will say, go ahead. Sorry,
Joelle Carter.
I when you said Joe, I thought that's what. Then it popped in my head. But something else that I thought was kind of curious about this episode. Watching it was unusual that Tim and Rachel basically played no part in sort of the last little bit of a run up. And I think as the series went on, they did more with them. But I didn't watch season 1 in great detail. I watched season 2 and, but it was curious that basically this was just all centered on the people in Harlan, and that makes sense based on what happened. But you have other great characters, Tim, Rachel, and Art, that don't get huge arcs in this that then develop later. So I thought that was curious to have a finale, and all his partners really aren't a piece of it other than to show up as the cavalry at the end.
Yeah, I always think about this show, and I wouldn't say it's a negative necessarily, but although you had the fine little supporting players, at the marshal's office, this was very much a show driven by a main character. It's very much it's a show about Raylan Givens as opposed to a show about the Kentucky U.S. Marshals.
Yep.
So yeah, they're simply just not going to get that kind of screen time. So I'm sure they got paid for it. But as opposed to when you're watching a show where the show isn't, the show's called Justified, but the show could just as easily been called Raylan Givens because it's his show. As opposed to, God, I'll use a dope. I don't know why I'm going to use this as an example, but I will. Say the old CSI show. Remember when everyone was watching CSI?
Oh yeah.
And obviously the main guy in that was the Grissom character, if I recall, the William Peterson character. But over the course of time, we got so much about all the other characters because it wasn't about him. Because it was, it might be about the redheaded chick or the muscle-headed chick dude or the black guy or I can't remember any character names.
It's funny that you say it's not really about him, but he's the only character name you remember.
I know. I totally try. That's how you don't make a point.
Show your work, Scott. Show your work.
I can't believe other podcasts never invite me to be on. Wait, he talks a lot, doesn't say anything. But you know what I mean.
Totally get. I totally get what you're saying. Yes, they show up more as the show goes on, but they're great. Like you said, the great thing about this show is whoever shows up in guest roles or whatever, and really and it has to be the writing because no matter who shows up, the show is good. And in particular, what every season of this show does by sort of shifting. If you sort of look at Boyd as the season 1 big bad, it shifts Boyd, and then you sort of get Mags and Dickie and the Bennetts as the big bad in season 2. Then we shift to Neil McDonough and the Detroit connection in season 3, and all those characters bring a different flavor to what a villain is, and give some wonderful things for Timothy Oliphant to act off of. And so I like you said, if there weren't a million things to watch, I might just watch this on a loop because I found myself just letting it continuously play because I could just be mesmerized by it.
I know. When I finished season 2 and I kept going into season 3 and I started that and I was like, oh my gosh, Damien Dark. That's right. I'm just
yeah. Yeah.
I couldn't resist, but he's kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
and Justified is also one of those examples, and I've talked about this before, so I will be repetitive. The many of the great shows come down to that final showdown that's set up from the very beginning to, in some form. It might be two characters that are allied together that you have to break them apart and have them opposed to each other, or maybe they're two sides of the same coin, whatever. And again, I don't remember which podcast it was, but I know in the last couple of weeks I talked about this. Might have been with you, might have been with someone else, don't remember. And, I've used examples, The Americans, husband and wife against each other, Breaking Bad, Walt and Jesse against each other, The Shield, Shane and Vic against each other. You knew from the very first episode of this series you were going to have to end it with Boyd versus Raylan. You had to. I don't think you could not have had the final season go any other way. So it's just interesting knowing that now when you watch, from season to season, it's like, because even though Raylan is, as I just said, the main character, your next highest lead, I think, is Boyd.
Right.
He's, because that's the other storyline and the arcs that we're following all the time, which sometimes might be, at least for some period of time, might be operating independently of whatever's going on with Raylan Givens, even though they're bound to intersect eventually. But initially, we're kind of following both sides, just, again, like I think I mentioned, we're talking about The Wire, or I mentioned The Wire earlier. Same kind of thing. It's just like, I'm following the cop story, and I'm following the drug dealer story, and they may cross over, they may not. Justified, they do have to cross over, but
that they do. But I think you make the point. What's great in many ways about this show is so many shows don't show what the criminals are doing. They show the cops' perspective, and you get little glimpses into the criminals, and they're just bad guys. I mean, this show will give equal time to what the criminals are doing to what the good guys doing, and gives you a full picture so that when they meet, that's why you give a crap about what happens to Mags and Loretta. You've spent time with them, and those stories have been fleshed out. And in many ways, there are scenes you like Mags and scenes you hate Mags.
Right.
And so that's the difference. And like you were saying about CSI or something like that, you're getting their viewpoint of that story. In The Wire and Justified, shows like that, you're getting like a sort of a satellite view of the world that zooms in on characters, but you're seeing the whole world and not just a part of it.
Right, absolutely. And it's also, it's nice that they're able to do that on a show like Justified, because sometimes one of the issues you can run into with movies and TV series is something that's so centered around a specific character that character usually tends to be in almost every scene. And there's going to be a lot, but there has to be a considerable amount of screen time in Justified where Raylan Givens is not in the scene, because we're spending time with Boyd Crowder or Mags Bennett or whatever the storyline is. We give those scenes and those characters time to breathe and be fully fleshed out. Doesn't mean you can't do something great without that. It's just really the nature of the show, whereas if, say, you watch something like, I don't know, I'm looking at the poster on my wall right now, Chinatown, for example. I don't know why I'm using China, which is one of the best written things of all time. But Jake is in practically every scene. He's pretty much in every. In fact, I think he is in every scene, just about. And even the scene that he's not in, he's about to enter the scene. The scene might start without him there, but then he shows up. So, anyway, but it's really, when I was doing putting the information together to determine the countdown, and I was spotting this episode popping up here and there, and I instantly remembered it because the Margot Martindale thing, etc. But it was just watching it again. It brought it all back to me, and I remembered going, yeah, some of the shows that show up in this countdown, there'll be different reasons why one might rave about them. This one, it left me with such a feeling of satisfaction. Like, that was that was just, like a really fine, like the after effect of a really fine meal, because it brought the end of, like what you were saying before, a great season with a perfect end to that season, even though obviously there will be story threads which will therefore continue into the following season. And there's a lot of things that happen in season 2 that, as I've already pointed out, will continue both for the next season, if not for the rest of the series. Like Loretta, we're going to follow Loretta for the rest of the series. Dickie Bennett, we're going to see him throughout the next season. We're going to, all these characters. We're going to see Wade for the next couple of years. All these things. So it's a real fertile season in that sense, because as much as I do enjoy and as good as season 1 is, and I do really like season 1, that does tend to have, comparatively speaking, a bit more of a episodic. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say
like villain of the week.
Yeah, thank you. Because it's not procedural, but yeah. And you get there are a couple episodes in this season that have that to a slight extent. The Chadwick Boseman episode, actually, the Chadwick Boseman episode. He's in the show. He's in the episode for like 2.5 minutes. I just called it the Chadwick Boseman episode, but it's Chadwick Boseman anyway.
The season 2, the serialization of it really, I think, took it to a different level than season 1.
Yeah, because I never really even think about season 1 really being serialized, even though it is. But there's a lot. I think they were trying to find their way initially, if I'm remembering correctly. And so I think, especially when you look at the early episodes in season 1, they tend to be the villain of the week, crime of the week. I remember that, here's one about a bank robbery. Here's one who wants revenge, whatever. And every other episode, hey, there's someone from Deadwood. Hey, there's someone else from Deadwood. Hey, there's someone else from Deadwood. So basically, I'll say, Oliphant, could you call up your friends from Deadwood? Because we want them to show up. How many people from Deadwood eventually show up in the show?
Between this and the other FX shows, all of them.
Oh, right. So Sons of Anarchy had a bunch of Deadwood people in that. But that's what I'm thinking of.
Yes, anyway, absolutely.
I wonder if Deadwood will show up in the countdown. I wonder. Anyway, so I was just. I mean, obviously, I've enjoyed all the episodes that I've watched for this countdown so far, but this was one of the ones. But of the, what number is this? This is 13. So 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14. Do you realize I actually had to count that out on my fingers? That's how stupid I am to know how many episodes we've covered. Of the 8 that I've covered so far, this is one of the 2 or 3 that I really just made me go, I so missed this show and I want to watch it all over again. And I won't say what the other ones are.
No, I can say that in doing rewatches and following things and, going back and just putting something on because I think, I can't make up my mind. Deadwood's still sitting in my continue watching, and I'll probably watch some more of it. And I think to sort of tie the bow on what we've talked about, a great story when it's finished to completion is really satisfying. And when when the main course, is Timothy Oliphant and Margot Martindale, that are telling that story, and you get to watch them work throughout that story, it's just fantastic. And I mean, to me, when there's nobody on TV that commands the screen the way that Timothy Oliphant does when he's in that Raylan Givens character. And he's just eminently watchable, eminently likable, and, the old Western stereotype of, the guy nobody wants to mess with and every woman wants to be with. He's just, he's just a star, and it shines. And this show really left me satisfied watching it. I'm going to keep watching it.
Excellent. Hey, I'm always been a fan. I mean, heck, there's a running gag with my fledgling screenwriting that for at least definitely the first and possibly the second scripts I ever wrote, when people are saying, well, who did you picture for the main character? I was like, Timothy Oliphant. Just if you ever read them, you'll. So now, if you ever read any of them, especially Timothy Oliphant, it'll make it all better for you. Yeah, and also, this is one I think it was also kind of clear cut why this would be the selection for the series overall. I mean, not that there aren't other standout episodes, there absolutely are. Hey, the final 3 episodes of the series altogether, Fugitive #1, Collateral, and then the series finale, The Promise. That's a great little run at the end there. It's a great episode, and the series itself really went out on a high note, which was nice to see because you're always worried when a series is wrapping up. Are they going to stick the landing, or are they going to peter out, or are they going to just turn into a big steaming heap of crap like Dexter did, or something like that. And I thought this is one of the shows that really did a fine job with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way it ended, I mean, when you care about a character as much as Raylan and have spent that much time with him, you want that character to have a satisfying conclusion, whether it's tragic or whatever. You want that conclusion to stick the landing, and no complaints. The finale of this show, Raylan, riding off into the sunset. You hate to see him go, but you're happy with how the story went, and so I'm going back and watching this. If I did my favorite dramas, as I've thought about it the last couple of years, this show's probably slipped in my list, and it may not have been justified for it to slip. I may just have had recency bias over what I've watched, in the last few years since it ended, because damn, it's a good watch, and it's a fun watch, and probably the most excited I've been about watching an old show I hadn't seen in a while. So I'm glad we did it, and I really enjoyed it.
Excellent. I feel the same way. So, since you said all that, I will get to the final aspect of this podcast, which is just telling you what's going to come on the next one. So, I will again run through where we are so far in this countdown. Number 20 was House's Head from, obviously, the TV series House. Number 19 was The Getaway, the season 4 finale for Dexter. Number 18 was Out of Gas, a great episode of Firefly. Number 17, When I Did With You, Brian, was an episode of Mr. Robot, 407 Proxy Authentication Required. Number 16, that podcast, was an episode of Hannibal on Mix Mono, the season 2 finale. It's my favorite. Anyway, number 15. Get out of here, you. Number 15. Actually, one of my favorites in the countdown so far. The Good Wife. The episode Hitting the Fan. Such a good episode. Number 14. The one we just released last week with, Dan and Colleen, was an episode of The X-Files. Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose. And we just gave you number 13, which was obviously Justified Bloody Harlan. So now you're wondering, hey, what's number 12 on the greatest TV drama episodes of all time? Well, probably going to release it on Christmas at this point. And Dan and Jamie are going to join me on it. And it's going to be Battlestar Galactica, Crossroads, Part 2, the finale of Season 3. So, kind of excited about that. Kind of pissed off, too, because I just discovered this week that Battlestar Galactica is no longer on Hulu. It's no longer on Amazon, as it was earlier in the year. It's only on Peacock TV. Kind of pissed off about that. Thanks a lot, NBC Universal. But hopefully, folks will still be able to watch it. You can actually you can get Peacock, you can watch it for free. At least, so it's got that going for it, but I got to watch it on the goddamn computer, so I'm not happy about that. So there won't be no big BSG rewatch for me. So unfortunately. So yeah, I believe now we were set to release that on December 28th. I might change my mind and release it on Christmas Day because we're going to record it before Christmas. Why wait till the following week? I have to make up my mind about that. But just in case. This may or may not be the last podcast before Christmas. So we can probably wish everyone a happy holiday in advance. So, if you'd like to, Brian.
Absolutely. I hope as 2020 comes to a close, I hope everyone has a happy holiday season. Stay safe, and let's get to 2021 and keep counting down good shows and look forward to a better 2021.
Oh, so sweet. I never even did the wrap up. Got to do that right now. Hey, if you enjoyed this podcast, you'll enjoy hanging out on our Facebook page as well. It's the Serious TV Drama Podcast page. Like the page and talk about shows like the ones we just talked about and so many others. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to our feed as well as rate and review us there. I love this line that Colleen used in our previous podcast. You can find us wherever podcasts are found, although I think probably our podcast probably isn't on a lot of hoity-toity platforms. So forget that. You can actually be the first person to download us on Stitcher. I'm still waiting for just one download there. Although if you're hearing me say that right now, you've already downloaded us, so why am I even saying this? But if you go to stvdpodcast.podbean.com, you can actually access all 292, dear Lord, episodes of our previous podcast. Oh boy, number 300 is coming up soon. I wonder if we're going to do something special. Believe it or not, there actually are a few decent ones in there. It's kind of like sprinkling diamond dust on a wheelbarrow of manure or something. Anyway, you can also finally follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is at STVD Podcast. That's STVD as in Serious TV Drama. So, Brian, you just did the holiday thing, so I'll do the same. It's still Hanukkah, so happy Hanukkah to everybody. But by the time you hear this, Hanukkah will be over. So I hope you had a happy Hanukkah. Any other holidays you may choose to celebrate this month or whatever. Merry Christmas, Merry Kwanzaa, Merry whatever. I don't know. Merry to everything. Let's just get this year over with, and let's hope that next year is a damn sight better. Did my cat just meow? Look at that. He was sleeping the whole podcast, and he meows right at the end.
Well, he wants to wish everybody happy holidays too. So,
yeah. Well, he was saying he was going meowy Christmas. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah. Meowy Christmas. That's hard to say.
Like most things I do on this podcast.
Yes. So I want to add two facts that I forgot to add real quick.
Go for it.
A couple of my friends in law school were from Harlan, so I'm familiar with Harlan. The shot at the beginning of the town of Harlan, shot up from on a hill, was shot near one of my friend's houses. And it actually, he recognized it from the road on his house. So shout out to my friend Stacy, who I went to law school with. And the last thing I'll add is that I have sent, Scott, in honor of my Kentucky show being on this podcast and my love of it, I have sent Scott an MP4 of me doing a short rendition of You'll Never Leave Harlan Alive. And if you like it, I did it. If you don't like it, I didn't do it. So I'll leave it at that. But thanks for having me, Scott, and I look forward to podcasting with you again sometime soon.
It'd be really funny if I don't use it on the podcast. People are like, what was he talking about?
Well, if Scott,
I'm going to use it.
No. If you don't use it, we can sell it in Japan as a collector's item, and for thousands of dollars, 10 years.
I'm just picturing you. I picture you like with big like Japanese anime emoji hearts in your eyes, like a whole Hello Kitty kind of thing with Brian. That's right. We never got around to mentioning that song, which appears in all 5 or 6 seasons of the show in different versions, different covers of it. But yeah, it's great. It's a great song. It's very fitting because of how much of the show is centered around Harlan County. The only thing I wanted to mention, it kind of makes me think of having the fact that song does show up in one form or another in all 6 seasons. It also makes you wonder, why didn't they use that for the theme song instead of that other thing?
Right.
Because if they had, then I could have made the reference hey, another connection to The Wire, because The Wire uses Down in the Hole every season. It's a different version, but it's different. Anyway. All right,
so there's your appendix.
Yeah, great. Awesome. I was really not on my game this podcast. I apologize. Anyway, good night to everybody. Good night to you, Brian. I would say you'd have the last word, but it seems like you've had the last word 3 times already. Now do it one more time.
Good night, everybody.